Good morning again to everyone. Welcome to the 11th Annual Teaching and Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment Virtual Conference presented by Northeastern State University. This session is 1 in 60. We have to Friday of next week, February 14th. I'm Bob Hales, as many of you know by now, and I'm your moderator. We have Michelle doing the captioning for all of our sessions. To view the caption, simply click on the closed caption icon on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. Today's session is 10 virtual reality tips and resources. We have with us Lynn Scroggin, who is currently a digital learning architect at the University of Colorado, Denver. Lynn, let me turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you, and welcome to everyone. I use virtual reality in my undergrad and in my graduate level master's classes, and have done so for many years, and have developed and acquired a number of tips and resources that I think are beyond the ordinary, that you should find very useful. And so we're going to share those, and at the end we'll take some questions. But for now, the best process for you to use as we proceed with this little chat is for you to pull up your chat window, because the meat and potatoes of this presentation are not what you see on your screen, and they're not what I'm going to say. The meat and potatoes are going to be in the various artifacts, handouts, guidebooks, guidelines, resources that I send you links to. So you will want to collect them. If you're unable to do that, at the very end, I have my email address posted, and you can simply email me, especially for those of you that are listening to this recording after the fact. You can email me, and I will send you that same file with all the links on one page. So let's begin with our 10 interesting and exciting tips related to virtual reality in instruction. The first tip is a VR taxonomy. I'm going to go ahead and post into the chat area my first link, which gives you access to this chart. But the notion here is there isn't a single way to use virtual reality, but we tend to use technology of this type, of this immersive nature, in the lowest common denominator ways. So to show you some of the range of possibilities for using virtual reality, it ranges from the left side of your screen, from passive use, to the right side of this continuum, or active use, increasingly active. So things that are more observational or explorative, things that we interpret and try to understand, all the way to micro simulations and complex simulations, and to those environments where we collaborate with virtual reality side by side, or with others at a distance, and even to the point which is a constructionist role for virtual reality, where students are designing their own virtual reality. As I said earlier, it's interesting, and I want you to see this chart, because we don't have to do VR the way you've always seen it at conferences or presentations. There's a full, rich array of possibilities here, but we tend, in most educational settings, to concentrate our efforts in the first 3 columns, when in fact some of the more powerful and useful and insightful uses of VR can be found to the right side of this continuum. So I'll leave you with that to explore and to think about. I'm going to move on to our second little slide, and that's the second resource for you, which is called The Grammar of VR. Okay, that's right, this is a grammar lesson, but the good news is that this isn't a very long grammar lesson, and it's not very boring. It's sort of interesting twist for you. Here's how I came up with this notion. I would like to change the grammar of VR. I looked at the literature for the last few years of what people do and how they use VR, and I studied their verbs of action. What did they do with VR? How did they use it? What verbs did they use to describe how the students experience VR? and I was unimpressed and at length with their particular use of verbs, which really represents how they're using VR. Instead, I began to rethink and redesign the notion of why can't VR be used for better things, for higher level thinking sorts of things? Why does it always have to be the lowest common denominator use for VR? So I created a new grammar for you. I'm going to push that link out to you now. That's an article you can read. The article suggests that most use of VR across the world is very low-lying fruit in nature, very unimaginative, but that we can do deeper things. We can pursue the higher order of Bloom's taxonomy with how we use and employ VR. And I encourage you to look at the new verbs that what you're going to see are the old verbs of what everybody around you is using VR to do. And I want you to look at the new verbs of how we should be doing, how we should be using, how we should be employing virtual reality in education. So I'll leave you with that little thought, and I'm going to move on to the next one. By the way, we'll have plenty of time. I'd like to just get all these artifacts out, and then we can take all your questions. The next artifact that I have available for you is teaching strategies. Everywhere I go, I'm hearing from educators that what teaching strategies can be employed? How can I, with VR, how can I do different kinds of things with VR other than just the standard walkthrough, the standard, ooh, that's cool experience? So I've compiled a list of teaching strategies for you, and there's the link for that one. I forgot to put the title in there, so I'll just do it one more time for you. There you go. Teaching strategies. And so it's filled with ideas on how to use VR in an assessment role, or how to use VR in a different type of role than you're accustomed to, just the visual walkthrough, the visual tour, the visual look around experience. So that's the notion I wanted to get across with that. Now let's go to the next artifact I have for you. This is one of my favorites. This is called BDA, Virtual Reality BDA, before, during, and after. It's really interesting that most folks don't really take advantage of the possibilities of using virtual reality in the classroom. There's your link. Okay. Once again, I missed the number. I'll have to go back and try to grab that one. But a lot of folks don't take advantage of it's hard to type and do this at the same time, so excuse me. There we go. There's the number 4, makes it a little clearer for you, BDA. So the notion here is that what do you do before a virtual reality experience instructionally? What makes sense to do during a virtual reality experience? And that's limited because students are fully engaged and engrossed, but there are some things you can do right in the middle, like a stop, a pause, and a discuss. But you'll see living examples of what to do before, during, and after. And of course, what do you do after a virtual reality experience in a classroom setting? These are rich instructional strategies, questions, approaches that can help make the virtual reality experience less of the wow, excitement kind of engagement and more of an instructional cognitive experience for you. The next slide is tip number 5. That has to do with managing VR. A lot of folks think that you just buy VR, you put it in your class, you teach with it, and that's all there is to it. But no, there's a whole world of responsibility for the educator, a world of managing those VR resources. So things like storing? How do you store VR resources? How do you deal with battery charging? How do you deal with check-in and check-out of resources or scheduling? How to manage apps? How to disinfect VR head? All those kinds of things are the things we forget about, the logistics of using VR. So what I'd like to do is give you my list of notions not to forget about for managing virtual reality. I hope that you get the gist. Those of you that may have come in late, you get the gist here that I'm not going to be highlighting a lot of points on the screen or in my oral presentation, but I am attaching in the chat box all of these links to artifacts, guides, and resources that you can really take and study in depth. So that's the managing.
Guys, I'm trying to change it to my headphones.
Managing VR. Okay, now the next piece here is student creation of VR. It's an interesting phenomenon. As I go to conferences across the country and in different countries, I noticed that one of the largest, are you okay? I heard something. One of the largest trends, one of the most interesting trends is that folks are looking for not to necessarily use VR themselves as professors, instructors, and teachers, but rather to have the students develop the VR themselves. And so that's an interesting trend. And so I've added a list of different resources that we've seen students use, that many of which are free on this list, for students to use to develop and create their own VR. There are some very wonderful items, and many of them, of course, are free. So there's a list of resources for developing VR where students do that as a project in a course. And now I'm going to tip number 7. Tip number 7 is, when should I use VR? Now this time I don't have an artifact. I'm going to pull it up on the screen, but it's going to be just limited in that way for number 7 and 8 that's forthcoming here. When should you use VR? Let me go back. You know, this question came to me twice from higher ed presentations I've conducted, that where professors and other educators are asking, when does it make the most sense to use VR? And conversely, when should we not use VR? And that'll be the next slide in a second. Well, we should use VR when visualization can really make things happening in the learning sense. I like to use VR to aim it at specific misconceptions students have, to work those out and to make them go away. I like to help make concrete those things that may be a little more abstract or unrelatable to students. It makes a lot of sense there. It makes a lot of sense if you have got a stubborn and recurring learning problem. You see it every semester. It comes back to bite you like a gnawing zombie. But I like to aim the virtual reality at that to see if we can get that problem to go away up front instead of coming back over and over in tests and reviews. A second reason for when you would want to use VR is when experience is more important than just memorization. If you need competency, if you need a real experience, if you need something along those, that really can help, because virtual reality is an experiential technology. The final bullet I wanted to mention is that when you can bring life to something that's really boring, I believe that's a good use of virtual reality. But now, that moment you've been waiting for, when not to use VR. Oh my, oh my. The, oh, I saw a question there about when appropriate. Let me back up there. Can you address the use of VR, AR in an online setting format? I do use them in a fully online and in a hybrid setting, both in my graduate level. I will actually mail kits of materials and resources to students who want to undertake that as a group project or as an individual project. Sometimes I've mailed one to each student in a group that's doing a group project on potential and application of VR in their specific arena or field of study. And sometimes I'll just mail it to an individual student, and that becomes an offline experience. Now, that being said, I do have some virtual reality experiences that are built into my online courses that I can do through 360 walkthroughs. I've had students develop projects in which they create a escape room with a 360 virtual reality experience, and students have to walk their way out using math or using science to solve their exit, to create an exit strategy for themselves. So that's actually embedded right onto the screen in online learning for virtual reality. And so that's an example of that. So I return to your screen, which is when not to use VR. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention. I get ahead of myself, please forgive. In my undergrad classes, I use it in a live setting, and I actually use it to diagnose reading disability. And that's a topic we'll touch upon a little later. Now, back to the screen. Sorry for the bird walk there. When not to use VR, when does it make sense to avoid it like the plague? Well, if it has nothing to do with the lesson, gosh, why bother? Well, if we've got very limited time in class and it's just going to take such a block of time in my class that I'm losing other valuable content and interaction, that makes no sense. Now, this is a personal problem I have. If VR is candy, reward, attraction, or picayune, spelled crap, then I'm not sure that belongs in the classroom. And that's very common we see today. It's kind of the wow moment, the get them excited moment. Doesn't really impress me. But also, this is a really interesting one now. When VR usage is unethical or questionable, maybe that is something that we need to stay away from. So what do I mean by that? Well, the immersive experience, let me start over. If the immersive experience you're about to show presents a false or a one-sided story to a very, very complex problem, that might not be fair or the best use of virtual reality because it's so influencing. If now the immersive lesson that you're planning leads to counterproductive psychological and emotional manipulation of people, for example, if the immersive activity links some strident emotion to a rushed call to action or a financial transaction, then maybe we should steer clear. So like showing some sort of activist experience and then asking students to come up front and sign a petition. We know that it's an empathy machine, but at what point does it verge on manipulation and emotional and psychological manipulation? I am reminded of a experiment, actually, I heard about in New York City, in which street hawkers provided immersive gear to every passerby in order to obtain donations for charitable funds. And so at any rate, those passerbys were exposed to emotional scenarios via VR immersion. And they could what they found, and they actually armed half of their hawkers with VR and half of them with pictures on a clipboard. And the ones who had the virtual reality raised more donations and raised them at double or triple the rates, depending on the part of town, of those who merely reviewed the print materials on the plight of the needy. So you can see there are some interesting ethical considerations there, manipulation considerations there. But I think if we just show all sides of an argument and we, as I said earlier, don't push people to make a decision or to sign a petition or to raise money or other types of calls to action, I think you avoid some of that blame. Interesting topic, eh? So now I'm going to number 9, and I'll be going back to the chat board to push a couple resources here, or one more resource. And these are VR classroom safety guidelines. Did you know people can fall and get hurt using VR? Did you know that VR can cause vision and eye strain on some folks? Did you know that folks can get dizzy and fall? I've had that happen to me before, and I'm quite adept at using VR. It's just how the VR was designed. So some years ago, we started to develop some safety guidelines, which were then reviewed and vetted by the American Optometric Association. Yes, that's the medical group of eye doctors, ophthalmologists, optometrists, and vision therapists, and so forth. And we developed some vetted classroom safety guidelines so that you can use VR safely in your teaching environment. Things like having a spotter, doing VR in a seated fashion. And you'll see there's quite a list there. This is the most valuable resource, maybe next to the BDA resource that I gave you at the top, because this will show you how to use it safely and effectively and medically vetted in your classroom. So take a look at all of those guidelines, and by following those guidelines, I think you're going to do quite well. I now jump to item number 10, our last of the 10 tips before we, I see the tip there for number 9. I see it says, I don't see the link to number 9. I see it all right there. Ends in UK, starts in HTTPS. Do you got it? Somehow that got sent to one person. Oh, actually, let me see here. Yeah, because Tom had sent me a question earlier. Somehow it reset that to everyone. Yes. Here we go. We'll reset that to everyone. Sorry, that was just an automatic item. It looks like did you all get the rest of them? It looks like they all went to you, and just that one came to Tom, who asked a question. Everybody get that one? Good. And somebody is missing 6, 7, and 8, huh? There's a 6, but there is no 7 or 8. I'll give you 6 one more time, and then we'll come back. There's no 7 and 8, so I'll give you 6 again here. Then we'll continue to talk about our last item. But this is a very valuable, these safety guidelines for the classroom are very valuable. I also announced that there is no link for 7 and 8, just those things that are on the screen. Okie dokie, here we go. Bear with me here. So vision, okay, I got to go to the next slide here. Vision challenges. Now, some people struggle with VR. That's right. There are a lot of people that can struggle with VR. In fact, when they put on the headgear, it can be an interesting experience for some folks. Here's the statistics. For the last 4 years, I've been testing every cohort. Well, before I give you the statistics from the university, here's an example of a middle school that's using VR. And immediately after the lesson, probably about 70% of all students reflected disorientation, dizziness, and uncomfortable feeling after the experience was over. Here's a couple students, actually you can't see all of them on the screen. There are about 8 or 9 students from Mexico City doing a presentation at a conference, and they had developed VR as a part of their presentation. But what was really interesting is 4 of these kids of the 9 could not see VR without getting sick. So that's why I'm trying to give you faces behind the data. There's my number. At the university, I've been testing undergrads every year for 4 years, every semester, and approximately 16% of our undergrads cannot see VR without one of 12 different symptoms. Symptoms like dizziness, double vision, headaches, eye pressure, nausea, and so forth. So that measures up to an international figure where we know that percent is around 14% worldwide. It's higher in lower socioeconomic environments. Now, you might ask, why? Why do we have that problem? We have that problem because in order for you to see VR, your eyes must do 3 things: track, focus, and team. Track an object as it moves from left to right or across the screen. Focus on an object as it moves from the background to the foreground. And your eyes have to do that together, called teaming. You have to both go to the same spot. So the problem that we're seeing with the, going back to the, I'll just leave it at that. The problem that we're seeing with the, with the vision challenges is that about 16% of my student population, about 14% of our learner population worldwide has an inability physiologically for their eyes to track, focus, and team. So they actually just had an instant eye test. And there are a number of solutions on how to address this. They're in the safety guidelines. You'll see those in the document I already gave you, right? And it's also an indication that someone may want to get an appointment with their eye doctor and mention that, because it not only affects VR, but it affects your ability to drive safely and your eye-hand coordination for sports and different career choices, because vision is important for accuracy in different manufacturing or flight, other areas, other industries. And it also affects the ability of actually kindergartners and first graders to read. So we actually use virtual reality to do eye testing. And we use virtual reality to treat this problem when we discover it. So those are my 10 points, which takes us to this point. Now I've put all those attachments, all those artifacts up there, 1 through 10, but 10 didn't have 1, 7, and 8 were just the screen. And now we're going to go to a question mode, but I wanted you to remind you that that's my email. So if something fell apart or you didn't grab those, or for any other reason you want to send me your reach me, that's how you reach me, and then I can send you that entire list as far as those tips. Now, once again, before we jump into the question mode, I wanted to say I don't do the traditional, here's VR, here's the bandwagon approach of here's all the exciting things you can do with it. I like to pepper you with all of these resources that'll help you think more deeply, go farther, do it safer, and make better steps with VR. So that's the notion of what I've tried to do here. So now we're going to go to the chat mode for any questions that you might have, or where do we have the facilitator still here?
Yeah, that's right here. And when so I have a question or 2 or 3. Looking down the road, what does your crystal ball say for virtual reality? How it's used, technology, applications? What do you see?
Well, I can just make 2 comments on that very quickly. Number one is that as I look down the road, I have the online community manager for the LinkedIn AR/VR media group, which is 11,000 plus members. It's a big deal, and most of it's behind behind closed doors research, business industry. You just can't see it all yet, but it is not going away. It's getting bigger and bigger. You have no idea how many folks are working in this industry behind the scenes, preparing solutions and opportunities. So it's not going to go away. There is a debate, however, that, and I do have the data on that, that suggests that AR will surpass VR due to cost and ease of use issues. I don't think it's presented itself quite yet. I thought they were thinking that AR would outgrow and outpace VR by the end of 2019, and I just don't see that as I go to conferences and sessions, but I know it's coming. So I just wanted to mention that. You know, we've got Apple with AR patents and other groups that are really stepping up to the plate on that. So I think that'll happen. And VR won't go away. It'll simply be a different channel. That's your first question. I have one here on the screen, and I'll come back to you, Bob. Let's see. How would you address low-cost initiatives for students when looking to use AR, VR in a distance education format? I've talked to a number of industry experts recently who suggest that just investing in the high end isn't always the best way to go because you don't have the accessibility and the broad application of VR that can be used at a low cost. So it's much more difficult to deploy. So the low cost approach is where you're using the portable devices like the one you see on your screen right now, the little portable devices that strap on, and use a cell phone for the presentation. That's generally considered the low cost entry level for this technology. And so that's how folks are pursuing that. A good example would be architecture firm in Florida, international architecture firm was trying to deal with build a customer opportunity in Florida, building a bridge for seniors over and a community over a busy road, and they could either build it under or over or much higher over. There's height, and the community was all worried about what it would do to their view and other aspects, safety. And so what they were able to do with the low cost gear, like you see here, was bring that in and let senior citizens and general citizens actually see what the final product would look like in all three permutations before any decision was made, so they could feel comfortable about the architectural project. And then of course that company got that business. Let's see, go ahead, Bob, you had another one? Then I'll come back to the list here. No voice, so it must be distracted. So what are the accessibility issues, requirements for VR tech? It's a little difficult to deal with that right now. I don't have my hand on some of the resources. Are you talking about visual disabilities, attention deficit disability? What type of disabilities are you referring to? Because with accessibility issues for visual accessibility, or that's a little tougher because they simply can't experience it at the same level. That's why so many of the users are taking the gear off, and we have some of those discomfort and safety concerns and dizziness where people fall. So it's not quite up to speed yet in terms of solving that problem, but I need a little more information. Maybe you could email me with your specific questions. Let's see here, what do we have here? I've already got that one. One's described in the American for Disabilities Act. I can't speak to that other than the issues that I've put into the safety guidelines already for providing safe support, buddies, people to stand by you, their strategies for taking them off when you feel discomfort, and so forth. Do you have any experience or recommendations for creating replacement assignments for those who cannot use AR or VR due to accessibility? The safety guidelines do have a couple of recommendations that I've listed in that document, and but they're not quite the same. So the issue would be one of the key things I find is that I try to find content that's very safe anything that's swirly and circly and roller coastery and has rapid motion can cause any small problem to exacerbate itself. For example, you can also do that to yourself. We call that self-driving in VR. You put a VR headset on someone's inexperienced with it and they move their head too rapidly. They're just so excited. You can imagine, move your head around as fast as you can. That's what they're doing with VR. And we teach them to keep their head straight, to sit on a swivel chair, to move slowly. And the slow panoramic viewing and enjoyment really mitigates a lot of those problems of self-driving ourselves into craziness with virtual reality.
Well, I'd be interested in knowing how many of our participants here have ever actually experienced virtual reality, wearing goggles and so forth.
Me and my students at the university? I'll assume that that's what you meant. About 46% of the students that I asked them before they come into our class, before we actually try virtual reality, about 46% of all students have tried virtual reality. That's a shock that it's not higher and that's been trending down in the last year. About 2% of our students have used virtual reality in any other course at the university, 2%. So it's hardly used at the university level. No matter what anybody tells you, it's just a small group of students that are exploring it. And the group of this year, the group of students who refused to put it on due to past negative experiences has grown. So they're even though I can protect them with swivel chairs and with buddy spotters and with safe, comfortable content, it's still a concern that just won't go away unless they address that with their eye doctor. And by the way, this particular problem is treatable. It's treatable with, and many times just 10 weeks of vision exercises and the problem can recorrect itself. Let's see, do you often design your own content? Do you find pre-made OER resources online? For the most part, I find pre-made OER resources online. I have the capability to design my own content. I have some students do the design of their own content, but some people prefer the former, some people prefer the latter, and some people do both. So any of that is possible. Do I think textbook publishers will jump into VR content making? I believe they will. I believe probably some have. I think I've seen something like that before in the 360 world. That's the lowest common denominator of the the VR world. So VR photography and so forth. So yeah, I think that's going to happen. My concern is that textbook companies tend to do things that, if you remember my comments on the grammar of VR, they tend to do things with the lowest potential verbs instead of the really high potential of verb. So that's my concern there.
Well, and for me too, I'll say I still have some Samsung VR goggles, which they've for some reason stopped updating and selling anymore. But I watched some of the past Winter Olympics in VR, and having skateboarders doing the half pipe coming right at you is pretty exciting. And then CBS broadcast at least one of the Final Four basketball games in virtual reality, and it was really real. It was like you were right there on the edge of the court, and they're coming at you. It was certainly a different feeling
Yes, and I'm actually more impressed that I don't think that's been a commercial success of sports with VR, but I like more of the arts with VR, where you are immersed around, in an art museum, where you are put in the middle of a performance of Cirque du Soleil, and you get to be in and among the performers instead of watching them from the behind the fourth wall. So all of that is possible. One thing no one has asked about is, how do you measure instructional success with VR? And I'd like to just, while we're getting some more questions here, and then I'll come back to, I just saw a new question appear. But how do you measure success with VR? So I've done a whole series where I first started watching what the Air Force is doing with VR and how they measure academic success, whether it was worth it. And then I took a look at the CU Medical Center, Anschutz Medical Center, and how they were using VR and how they contemplated assessing its value. And then I began to, based on some of my other experiences, I began to rethink and created a new model for, if you're going to use VR, if you're going to write a proposal for VR, if you're going to write for a grant, if you have to defend, the outcomes, if you have to show benefits, return on investment, or gains, how do you do that? Because almost everybody's just saying, wow, it's fun, wow, it's exciting. And so I'd like to share with you my sequence of thinking, which is also represented in the sequence of articles. And I'd like to present that to you here with my last links. There's 3 articles there. One is called Flying High with Educational VR, that's the Air Force. One's called VR for PT, that's VR used for physical therapy, and how it can, and how we're using it, and showing that we're reaching student educational outcomes. And then my last one was, okay, how do I score VR for educational advantage? How do I defend it, support it, represent its success to funders for grants? I think you'll like that article. There's 3 articles, and my thinking, you'll see how my thinking develops over time. And that's something that I think is sorely wanting. Now, going back to, while you grab that, let me go back here. Do you integrate student-created content in future courses as a form of open pedagogy? I plan to do that. I haven't done it yet because I've had many other goals with my virtual reality. But examples of student deliverables for AR, VR assessment themes, or assessment items. AR and VR assessment items. So an example for assessment is where you teach your lesson traditionally, and then you take them through a VR experience and ask them, for example, we're studying the solar system, and we take them through the solar system in a VR experience, but ask them to identify as they go and to note what they've learned. So they're actually reflecting upon what they've learned. You don't see any links? Okay, that went to Tom again, and that's because I must have replied to him. Let me look here. I'll send that one to everybody. It keeps defaulting to Tom. Tom, you must be a popular guy, because every time I send a link, it defaults to you instead of going to everyone. Did everybody get that one now? I think so. Yeah, that's what happens. Every time Tom asks a question, it defaults. Yeah, you got it now, huh? Other folks I know that have used AR for students to develop AR versions of their projects, and then they create a museum of them down the hallways of a school or a university, and where people can view them just by passing by with an appropriate device. And so it becomes a sort of a gallery walk, if you will. And peers can assess each other's work that way. That's another example. Was there a link for number 10? No, there was not a link for number 10. Let me see. Nope, I do not have a link for number 10. I was just mentioning some of my work with American Optometric Association in dealing with vision challenges and dealing with those youth. I survey them every year, and we're trying to look for some interesting things with that as well. Let's see. Yep, that's it. So frankly, I know we just have a couple minutes left. I think to touch on the question that Alan just asked, let me just share with you a little bit of the work I've been doing with the medical community in that regard. And we've been connecting virtual reality to reading. Now, reading requires you to visually track the words with your eyes as you read across the screen. You have to both eyes have to go to the same place, right on that page that the child is reading. And of course, this applies to adults. And then you have to be able to focus on specific words or letters to see the word as you're reading. And that, if you recall, track, team, and focus, the first three words of those bullets, those are the same physiological skills that your eyes need to see VR. So what we've been doing is learning that you can actually track, that you can actually identify reading difficulties with the with the virtual reality, and you can actually treat them on children as early as 5, 6, 7 years old. And we've been working in that regard to connect, and I'm doing a South by Southwest presentation in March on how we connect virtual reality to early learning by identifying visual problems with children that's affecting their reading. These are not issues caught in the standard classroom eye test in kindergarten. So just threw that out there for fun there. But those are the key words. That's what you need to see VR.
Do you have any more questions or comments? It doesn't look like it.
Looks like we've
I
run our
really
course.
appreciate this stuff. Really helpful going forward. Those of us who want to work with VR.
I see Tom is going to be at, Tom, you're going to be at South by Southwest, so I will send you the link to my session shortly. I've just put down your contact information.
Well, great. Well, I want to thank you, Lynn.
You bet.
Maybe we can get you back again in the future to see how things have progressed as well.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah. Thank you all. We're going to close the room, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next session in about 10 minutes or so.